Hi there, my name is David Reside, and this is Developing Carbon Stories, a podcast about the project developers creating the most innovative and impactful carbon projects in the world. Developing Carbon Stories is a project by Abatable, a carbon intelligence and procurement platform that helps companies purchase high-quality carbon offsets. Each episode, I speak with an entrepreneur from a different part of the carbon ecosystem and talk about their journey so far and how they are acting on climate change. On this episode, we're speaking with Samir Ibrahim, CEO and co-founder of SunCulture, a climate tech company based in Kenya working to solve the biggest daily challenges of smallholder farmers. They develop off-grid solar technology to provide farmers with reliable access to water, irrigation, lighting, and mobile charging. Hi, Samir. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Developing Carbon Stories. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start by talking about your personal journey before you started or before you co-founded SunCulture. I did a bit of a low-key LinkedIn stalk, and so I saw you studied finance at NYU, and then you did a year at PwC. And then straight after that, you co-founded SunCulture in 2012. How did that journey start? Like, was that more of a spur of the moment thing, or was it sort of a lot of work going through uni and then through PwC thinking about this concept?
I wish that I was skilled enough to have this have been a spur of the moment decision. But I suppose when I look back, there was really no aha moment. As I always think about it. I think the SunCulture was, my journey is just a combination of so many things, most of which have to do with my family history and how I was brought up. So my family's from East Africa, and they got here in 1850 and then left in the 1970s, like a lot of other East Africans of Indian origin when Idi Amin was giving us some issues in Uganda. And growing up as a child of immigrants in the US, I was born in Canada, then grew up in the US. My parents always reminded me of the opportunities that I had that they didn't. And they kind of force-fed us that we have to use those opportunities for helping folks that don't have those opportunities, to help remove unnecessary suffering. So a lot of volunteering was built into our lives, both for my parents, through our religious community, etc. And I think there was this ethos growing up. But I remember in 2009 when I was in university, I was studying abroad in Shanghai. And we were learning about all of the sort of Chinese investment into East Africa. And I had one relative in Kenya, two relatives in Kenya, my mom's cousin and his mom. So I was emailing him all these like horrible ideas. Like, hey, this is going to be great. I'm going to come back. This is what I'm going to do. And it's sort of a combination of sort of being brought up and then looking at what's happening in the region, and then sort of being brought this idea for SunCulture. But I think it was just a long journey.
And so did you think the idea because SunCulture is based around the smallholder farming, did that idea, was that born from, I guess, the cultural background that you have in East Africa, or was it more from maybe your time in China? Like, how did that come about?
It wasn't my idea.
So whose idea was it?
Yeah, it was my co-founder's idea, and it came from a research paper that was written out of a think tank that was doing analysis on an NGO project that happened in West Africa that was combining renewable energy and agriculture, doing solar-powered drip irrigation, but at sort of sub-commercial scale, so NGO scale. It was that sort of the publicizing of that project that started the idea. And as we started digging into it, and from my personal perspective, as I started looking at numbers, and even over the last 10 years, as we keep digging into the data, you realize that there's just this massive opportunity to not only figure out how to solve some of the world's biggest problems, but do so in an environmentally sustainable way. It's I hate sounding preachy, but it really is a win-win situation across a lot of different avenues, which makes us attractive, right? Which makes this something that is something that I'm willing to commit myself to for a long time. So yeah, it started from just seeing what was going on and realizing no one was doing it, and being being young and naive enough to think we had a shot.
Well, worked out pretty well for you so far.
I think we still have a lot of ways to go, but I feel like we're in a good position to help make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. But what about the idea was like what most resonated with you? Like, as you mentioned, it ticks so many boxes in terms of being good for the world, a helpful thing, a good business opportunity. When you heard the idea and this concept of maybe what SunCulture was going to be started marinating with you, what was most exciting to you? Was it climate change? Was it improving food security? Was it the business opportunity? What was it about it?
All of the above. I've been able to refine what was exciting a little bit more clearly now, because I think once you see how things play out, you say, okay, this is what was exciting, this is why, and this is how it played out. And the way that we see the world, one is that the fact that climate change disproportionately affects those who are the least contributors to it rings very strongly in our ears every moment. So that's sort of that sort of disproportionate allocation of suffering just is really, really present in the way we think about the business. And climate change mostly affects smallholder farmers living in emerging markets. That's the group of people who are the most disproportionately affected by climate change, because they're the lowest contributors to climate change and they're getting completely wrecked by it. And the reason they're getting wrecked by it is because they make their money by either keeping animals or selling crops, both of which require water. And the way they get their water most of the time is by waiting for the rain, which is inconsistent and unreliable. And the changing climate is making that rainfall more inconsistent and more unreliable. And it's making the temperatures is just way hotter, which means it's also getting harder for them to grow food. So you have this really large group of people that are getting pushed further into poverty. And that was the first big aha moment, like, oh wow, like this is really bad. And then you start going deeper and deeper, right? And you go deeper and deeper and you say, okay, what happens when this large group of people who, about 2.5 billion people fall into this category, get pushed further into poverty? Well, then they go and they try to make ends meet somehow. So they either do that by buying diesel and petrol pumps, which then contribute to climate change, or they go and do stuff like cut down trees to make charcoal illegally, which I know you spoke about with Greg on the previous episode.
Yeah.
Both of these things are just ways to try to make ends meet, but they both contribute to climate change. So they go from becoming pushed further into poverty to becoming contributors of climate change. And then the third layer is that more often than not, folks can't make ends meet. And then they have to rush from rural areas to major cities in search of food and shelter. We have climate migration, and often you have political instability. You look at what's happened with the Arab Spring, look at what's happening in Sri Lanka right now, look at Madagascar, Haiti, Syria over the last decade. Plus you have fewer people growing food, which exacerbates the food crisis. So we sort of said, if we can figure out how to improve and protect the productivity of smallholder farmers, we not only build a very big, meaningful business that has a really great commercial outcome, but we also help relieve the stress that climate puts on our food, our economic, and our political systems. And that's what we set off to do. And it's this sort of intersection of how do we solve food security, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce economic poverty, and also reduce political instability. And that sort of center of that Venn diagram is really important for us. And you can do that by improving and protecting the productivity of smallholder farmers. So that's what we set out to do. We set out to do this on the continent of Africa because, well, one, I realized that I had an emotional attachment to the region because my family's from there, of course. But from a numbers perspective, 2/3 of the workforce in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, are in agriculture. 2/3 live off-grid. 2/3 live in rural areas, mostly the same people. So you have this very big percentage of the population involved in agriculture. It's the only continent in the world with a economic water scarcity versus a physical water scarcity. So we have enough groundwater to solve agricultural challenges, but we just don't have enough money to afford to pull it up. Whereas in other continents and other parts of the world, you have this physical water scarcity, not enough groundwater. And you have abundant light and you have 60% of the world's unused farmable land. So you have sort of this perfect combination of all of the resources required to solve this global amalgamation of problems sitting in one place.
Yeah.
So we said that's the perfect place to start. So that's why we launched SunCulture. So we launched to build a platform, a climate technology platform for rural emerging markets focused on improving and protecting the productivity of smallholder farmers to then solve all of these other challenges. So the way we look at our business now is we say that, you know, we're scaling this technology platform that switches African farmers from carbon emitting diesel fuel pumps and climate vulnerable rain-fed irrigation to solar powered irrigation. And then we on-sell other productive goods and services. So we started as a solar powered irrigation company. We're the first solar powered irrigation company on the continent of Africa.
Oh, really? And so most of these smallholder farmers, they're using diesel generators to pull water from the ground from bores. Is that right?
They're either doing that. So using diesel gensets or petrol pumps to pull water from lakes, river, boreholes.
Yeah. And the
wells, water harvesters. Or they're taking buckets, lowering it down into these wells and physically moving water. So those buckets weigh about 45 pounds, 20 kgs, those big weight plates in the gym. So they're either using these carbon emitting pumps or they're using physical manual power to do that. And the percentage of people that we've seen, a percentage of our customer base that are using the diesel or petrol pumps has increased over time. So there's sort of this urgent need to figure out how to replace them. But yes, the SunCulture system, I think as you were asking, replaces the power source for the water pumps and the water pumps themselves. We replace the whole system. So the actual product is in a simplified way, there's a solar panel on the roof. Solar panel is about the size of me. You can't see me right now, but it's about the size of me. It goes into a controller that we spend a lot of time on. We spend a lot of time figuring out how to get a relatively low amount of power to power relatively high powered appliances. And that controller then goes and moves the power into a water pump that is in any water source. And from the water pump, there's pipes coming up and we allocate water through either sprinklers or then drip irrigation. And there's sort of a product journey that we take our customers up on. First is this non-battery based product with sprinklers. So solar panel go into a controller, directly into a water pump and sprinklers. Then we upgrade people into drip irrigation. So using the same amount of water more efficiently so you can expand your land under irrigation even more. And then we upgrade people into a battery so they can irrigate at night and evening, have a little bit more control over their farming. And then we add on other appliances, both for productivity, so and for the household, so lights, TVs, phone chargers. So there's a sort of product journey, but it all starts with how do we figure out how to displace diesel and petrol pumps and get people irrigating more effectively.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the point you make about irrigating it at certain times of the day. I mean, because as I understand it, irrigation is best done outside of main daylight hours, and obviously solar panels generating some electricity when it's daylight. But so progressing on to the third stage that you mentioned, having that battery, that means they can do it in the the premium times, so hitting those those most efficient times for irrigation. Out of curiosity, do you have like numbers off the top of your head in terms of efficiency, like versus using a diesel powered generator to to do something similar?
So the yes.
And sorry to put you on the spot. Just
no.
Give me the numbers.
It's a few different ways to answer the question, right? So
sure.
You think about the importance of farming and irrigation. The reason why irrigation is so important is because we spoke about it before. Water is needed to grow crops and keep animals. Water is the foundation of agriculture. Irrigation can increase yields by 2 to 5 times. So having water in a consistent way regularly can just automatically increase your yields. So it's probably the lowest behavior change required and the highest ROI for any sort of farming initiative. Using a diesel water pump versus a solar water pump, in terms of just getting water to your crops, you're both getting water to your crops. The difference between a diesel water pump and a solar water pump for a farmer is that diesel water pump requires payments every month forever for fuel. So they're spending, $80 for fuel on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Our model is we make, sell, service, and finance our system. So people are paying us on a monthly basis over a period up to 30 months, and then they own it. So after the period of finishing off their lease to own payment period, they don't have to continue making payments. And they're paying us 45% less on the upper end of what they're paying for diesel or petrol on a monthly basis. So for them, the efficiency is on the money side first. So they're saving money, and then they don't have to spend money.
Yeah.
When you use a diesel pump, you often flood your crops. So you folks without micro irrigation, so that's sprinklers and drip irrigation, are wasting up to 90% of the water because they don't need that much water. So you have sort of water wastage. You have what's called soil leaching. So nutrients sometimes don't stay with the crops because they get drowned. You drown your crops. If they're close to a river, sometimes the nutrients, you have the fertilizers run off into the river. You might have heard fertilizer runoff, and then they go into the ocean, and you have this whole sort of ecology issue. So there's efficiencies on the money side, there's efficiencies on the water allocation side, and then there are a lot of efficiencies on the climate side. But a sell to the farmer, you can't say, hey, take this because climate, right? It's a money thing. Yeah. And this is where obviously carbon comes into play, because there's this non-linear correlation between price and addressable market. So I'll give you an example. If we reduce our monthly payments for a farmer, or the monthly cost that a farmer has to pay us, by 25%, our addressable market increases by 100% in Kenya.
Right. And what would that be in absolute terms? Like what's the reach of it at the moment?
So if we reduce it from $40 to 15% less than $40, which if my math serves me right, is $34. That increases our, and I'm just using rough estimates because of the currency, the FX. So we're having an election tomorrow, so currency's been a little bit all over the place the last few months. So let's use roughly $40 a month. So this is for our product with a battery. So this is for the larger system of the battery.
That's the deluxe. That's the deluxe package.
That's the deluxe package. Yeah. If we reduce that from $40 to $34 a month, our addressable market increases by 100%. If we reduce it from $40 to $20 by 50%, our addressable market increases by 600%. And this is done just by looking at how much money households make, the percentage of household income people are willing to spend on investing in a product like this, and what percentage of the households make that type of money. So in Kenya, households are willing to spend 35% of their household income on non-essential food items. So you take sort of what percentage of houses have where $20 versus $34 versus $40 equals 35% of the monthly household income. And that's how we get to that number. So there's this huge benefit to trying to figure out how do you continue to reduce the price of products, right? And I may be sort of preempting questions you're asking, but the way we the way we've thought about stuff, right? In agriculture and energy markets around the world, you sort of have seen subsidies that have been used to scale the uptake of these systems, right?
Absolutely.
Subsidies that have been sort of instrumental in getting new technologies into the hands of rural populations from an agriculture perspective and from an electrification perspective. Even if you look at sort of the rate of electrification for farms in the United States, in the 1930s, I believe it was only 10% of farms were electrified. 20 years later, post sort of farm subsidy program, you had 90% electrified. My phone that I'm using right now is all subsidized, but in the markets we work in, there are no subsidies for what we're doing, both on the ag side and the energy side. So one way for us to reduce the price of our product is to sell the carbon credits that are generated by displacing diesel and petrol pumps into the voluntary compliance market, and using those revenues not to just boost our margin or have extra revenues, but directly passing that on to the customer and directly reducing the price. So we're using carbon So we use financial services, so consumer lending, to try to bring that sort of all upfront price down, spread it out over many months so it becomes more affordable for more people. And then the most important part is, how do we use carbon revenues to then continue to lower the price to a point where this becomes a mass market product? And that's what we're hoping to do with you, is how do we bring that down? And that's the genesis of our carbon business. It's how do we take more ownership and make what we're doing more accessible, because the impact is so needed right now, especially as you look at the global food crisis, right? You look at Russia and Ukraine combined touch 12% of the globally traded commodities. You look at wheat consumption in many of the markets we work in Kenya, look at where that wheat comes from, and we're at huge risk right now. And this is true all over the world. So the sort of, during the pandemic, for the first 2 years of the pandemic, there was a company called 60 Decibels that did a lot of surveys for farmers in Kenya. And they found that 90% of farmers lost money during the pandemic, which sounds logical.
Yeah.
We did surveys around the same time. And for our customers in Kenya, nearly the same percentage of our customers reported making money. Oh, and by the way, the folks that lost money, according to the survey, they had to resort to a financial alternative like selling an asset or something, which is just really sad, especially in hard times. But nearly the same percentage of our customers reported making money, reported improving their way of farming, reported expanding their land under irrigation, and 96% of our customers reported improving their quality of life. So you sort of look at, it's easy for us to say our product reaches 13 SDGs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you actually talk to someone, and you talk to some of the most vulnerable people in the entire world during a global pandemic, and they're saying, I made money and I improved my quality of life, that's real impact. And that's why there's such an urgency around our carbon business, because we can get that to more people faster.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting, when you're talking about the particular crops that these farmers are growing, is the system that SunCulture has, does that lend itself to particular types of crops? Is it sort of region specific in that way, or how does that work?
The beauty of water and the beauty of irrigation is that it increases yields for most things. So all of our customers, I'll say most of our customers, because I haven't met all of our customers, not needing to be factually correct, but most of our customers practice mixed farming. So they keep animals, so cows, chickens, goats, etc., either for the meat or byproducts. They grow low-value crops that are seasonal every 6 months, like beans, maize, potatoes, etc. And then they also grow high-value horticulture crops in sort of kitchen gardens that expand. So stuff that we eat in salads, the greens, the peppers, etc. And one reason they do that is because the cash flows for each of those three types of crops and animals are different. So with animals, you can get sort of daily and weekly cash. For the horticulture, high-value fresh fruits and vegetables, you can get sort of every 3 months. You can harvest for 6 to 8 weeks, kind of thing. And then for the seasonal crops, you're harvesting every 6 months. So they control cash flow that way.
Yeah.
Water helps increase all of those sort of yields.
Okay,
I'll give you a few examples. I think it might be because you like numbers, right? So cows, milk is 85 to 95% water.
Yeah.
If you give a cow more water, they produce more milk. We've seen that just giving a cow water improves milk production by doubles it the next day, essentially. And if you use the water to grow Napier grass, which is used to feed the cows, you can triple and quadruple milk yields, which is huge. We had one farmer go from something like a handful of cows, 4 or 5 cows to like 40 cows. Sorry, I was just told, just because they had more water.
Right. And is that conducive for drip irrigation in particular? Because I would have thought that'd be more of like a, turning the tap on and off sort of situation rather than having a constant flow.
Water.
Which might be,
that's just a water pump moving water. This is just very simply not even using irrigation. It's just moving water from source, from the ground up to the surface.
Yeah.
Just as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
When you use sprinklers or drip irrigation on maize, low value crops traditionally, the big question was, does it work? We've seen yields increase by 50 to 100% just on maize. And then, of course, you can't grow high value fresh fruits and vegetables regularly without having irrigation. So we've seen incomes increase by 3, 4, 5 times on people's farms over the course of a year. It's quite significant and just really special to see.
Mm. And what's the current reach of SunCulture at the moment? How many customers have you got across Africa?
So we've served about 30,000 farmers, mostly starting in 2018. We talked about starting 10 years ago. First 5 years was a whole separate podcast conversation.
That's a whole setup. Yeah.
And then we started raising equity in 2017, started piloting our financing, and in 2018 we kind of started going. We operate our full network of retail engineers, sales, finance in Kenya. We work with distribution partners in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Togo. And then this year we're going to be launching that full retail sales, engineering, financing model in 2 new countries. Part of the service models we train our customers. All of our relationship managers for our financing business are trained agronomists. So we're able to provide advice. It's really interesting is we're able to correlate asset utilization with repayments. If you think about it, it's almost obvious that the more regularly someone uses an irrigation system, the better the yield's going to be, the better payer they'll be. Sure. No one's ever been able to prove that. We're able to prove that now. And we're able to actually start gamifying good farming behavior and incentivizing our customers to practice good irrigation behavior, to sort of remove inefficiencies in farming, which is quite an interesting use of the data we're pulling off of our systems.
Yeah, you mentioned the data collection you're doing. Could you talk to me a little bit more about the technology that you have that creates that Internet of Things between the different products that you have, and how that sort of centralizes this data collection?
It's really, I find it to be one of the most interesting parts of our business right now. So we have our sort of embedded data science platform that collects all of this data. We call it Marifa. Marifa means knowledge in Swahili. And it does sort of 2 things. So and we're building it to sort of beef up the capabilities of both of these things. So one part of it is, the first pillar, I suppose, is this incentivizing good farming behavior like we spoke about. So we obviously have data that's collected from our customers, who they are, where they live, etc., what crops they're going. Some of them we have soil data on them. We're beefing that up as well. We have data on how much solar is. We have all the data coming off from the solar panel, so irradiance, etc. We have all the data coming from the system, how they're using it, when they're using it, etc. So we have all this sort of like live usage data, which is for us really unique, because when people look at lending to smallholder farmers, which has been a big nut to crack over the past few decades, especially in development work, a lot of people are looking at making credit decisions based off of origination or pattern matching, like what traditional banks do. So David, if you and I went to go to get a loan, they'd compare my salary and where I'm from, my background and my credit score with those that they've given before and said, okay, this is the interest rate I'm giving you, right? Same with you.
Sure.
The thing with farming and this thing with smallholder farmers is that there's no credit history, very few assets to set as collateral. And the value is actually coming from a growing season, from the assets themselves, so from the farm, etc., not necessarily from the farmer. So it's hard to figure out if someone is a good farmer. We're now able to actually get the first real insights into a farmer's business behavior, which is what's needed to actually figure out if they're going to be a good payer or not. So we obviously use origination best practices, but what's really interesting is we can now start to tell who might start having trouble mid-season because they're not using the irrigation system as they were at the beginning of the season. And we can send nudges, we can give phone calls, we can, that's where the incentivizing the farming behavior comes in, because we have insights into, might someone become a bad payer? Might they have trouble mid-season? Let's course correct that. So this is the first time that we're able to see and course correct mid-season, which we find very exciting. So that's one pillar of Marifa.
Yeah.
The second one is just giving tailored advice. So how do we bring in weather forecasts, crop information, and give customized tailored recommendations to our customers? So that's sort of something that we're building, and we're using third-party partners, data that we have to give that advice.
Yeah.
And the third pillar, and I know I said there's two pillars, but there's actually three. The third pillar is how do we connect folks to the agriculture value chain? How do we bring in seed companies, fertilizer companies, other products and services, insurance companies into what we're doing? Everyone, there's a big, maybe it's just in my head, but a big race to be the entry point into smallholder farmers. And there's companies that provide seeds and fertilizers. There's companies that provide a lot of other stuff that actually reach more farmers than we've reached, and are hoping to sort of be the entry point into farmers. But the challenge is that it's much easier to sell somebody, for example, inputs or insurance when they have an irrigation system than vice versa. Irrigation systems are more expensive, so it's much easier to give someone credit for something cheaper once you have given them something for credit bigger. But irrigation systems are an insurance policy. It allows you to know that farmer is going to be making more money than they would have otherwise. So it's easy to then layer things on top because we're increasing money that they're making and increasing the food that's being grown. So it's really easy for us to then become this sort of platform to layer things on top of, which is, again, why we need to go from sort of 30,000 farmers to 100,000 farmers very quickly, and then to 500,000 farmers to 1 million to 3 million to 10 million very fast. Because the need for sort of what we're doing right now is very urgent. But I digress from the technology side. So that's what we're using the IoT from. And there's a lot of cool things we can do with it. But the first is, how do we just make sure that our customers are the best farmers in the world? How do we take traditionally what are considered to be risky customers to banks and make them super bankable? That's the first part. The second part is, how do we then make sure that they have access to the world of agriculture and open up the world to help them become sort of participate in the consumer markets, both from a commercial agriculture perspective and then just from a regular human consumption perspective. That's the goal. And the IoT platform Arifa allows us to do that with the data we're collecting.
Okay. And on like a practical level, I mean, that two-way communication that you have with the customers, is that just enabled through an app or something like that? Or how is that enabled?
On a very practical level, it's enabled first from phone calls, then through SMSs, USSD, and then an app. So there's sort of different layers that we've built in. We're
just
rolling
based
out
around the needs of now. Is that just based around the different needs of the customers and for that sort of reason?
Both the needs and also just timing of building, right? We start with what's easiest and then build up to what's hardest. So we're now we've built and are rolling out a customer app, and that's going to continue to evolve. But before we had that, we were just sending messages to people. Phone calls, messages. Yeah. Simple.
Yeah. Keep it simple if it works.
Don't need to overcomplicate things.
Yeah. And I wanted to just go back on one point. You were talking about the electrification as being such a critical element of development in Africa and solving the problems that you mentioned. Has that given an opportunity to collaborate with the government? Like, have you been speaking to the Kenyan government about these sorts of things? Like, has that been a collaboration that's been there from the beginning, or something you're looking at?
Yes and no at the same time. So in some markets, yes, in some markets, no. And more something we're looking at more recently than from the beginning. So in Kenya, we've started working with county governments under a World Bank program. And both of the candidates running for president, and again, the election is tomorrow, have put climate smart agriculture in their manifesto as sort of what part of what they need to focus on. So we're very much looking forward to collaborating with the new administration, whoever leads the administration, working with them to build policies that help get Kenya to food sovereignty. We've worked with the Togolese government, so we're currently working with them on Africa's first solar irrigation subsidy program. So the Togolese government raised money externally and subsidized our products by 50% in market. And this happened, we were talking about doing a partnership with them, and then the COVID crisis exacerbated their food challenges. And I think with supply chains being choked, they realized that they need to solve this, and they can't solve it internally with technology. So we started working with them on that, which we're very excited by. We're very interested in national food security programs. We want to work with more governments. I feel we didn't have the capability to do so from a supply side, from an understanding side, just from a capacity side. Over the last couple of years, we've built that capability, and now we're really interested in doing countrywide food security program for governments. I feel like it would be doing one where the government would allow other governments to see that they can solve issues internally. And they're not that expensive. There was a report that was published by Dahlberg a couple of years ago that said that in Kenya, you would only need $96 million of subsidy to get the country to 100% food security over a 10-year period using solar water pumps and irrigation. So it's relatively little bit amount of money to do this.
That was million, was it? 96 million?
Million.
Oh,
yeah, $1 million.
Right.
Not a lot of money.
Yeah,
and
right.
and technology costs have gone down from 2 years ago as well. So I guess that 70 million, $65 million would solve it. It's not a lot of money. And you're talking about getting a country to food security, 100% food security, right? Africa is projected to spend $100 billion importing food by 2030.
Wow.
That's wild, especially knowing that, like I said earlier, we have 60% of the world's unused arable land. We have sufficient and abundant groundwater. We have a population that is involved in agriculture that needs more jobs, and we have to import food. It's sad. It's really, really sad. And we need to figure out how to make Africa the breadbasket of the world.
Well, it sounds like, there's such a big opportunity there to grow into. It's a sad thing, but at the same time, it just shows, it presents itself as a really big opportunity and something you're, aspiring to deliver on. And I think that's a natural little segue, to hear about the vision for SunCulture, the aspirations, the next 5 years. What does SunCulture look like in 5 years' time? I guess at the moment you're across 5 countries with around 160 employees. Is that about right?
About 370 employees.
Oh, wow, I'm way off.
I think you forgot all of our sales agents that are out there doing the hard work selling these systems.
I must have. Apologies to the sales agents listening.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I think in 5 years, SunCulture is there's a way for us. We're just scratching the surface, right? We're the largest distributor of solar water pumps for smallholder farmers in Africa, but we're only at 30,000 farmers. We're just scratching the surface, and I feel like we're just getting started as a business right now. We need to be in the millions.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a pathway for us to figure out how do we get to being 50 times bigger in 5 years? How do we 40 times bigger? How do we get much, much larger than we are right now? And a big part of that is figuring out how to reduce price. But it's really thinking about how do we bring in carbon? How do we do country level food security programs? How do we launch distribution partnerships in other continents? And how do we put together a platform that allows us to use what we've developed in terms of modularity, both in terms of our business model, but also in terms of our software to scale this kind of hardware? How do we use carbon financing software to then look at bringing this to as many countries as fast as possible? But it's all about operational execution right now, plus bringing down the price. So it's kind of how do we reduce the price and just execute operationally, purely that. There's a lot of exciting things we could do in terms of layering new products on top, like I spoke about. But at the end of the day, if we don't figure out how to grow 70% more food by 2050 to feed sort of this 9 billion people, we're in a big amount of trouble. If we don't figure out how to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030, we're in big trouble, says the IPCC, right? So there's a lot of sort of urgent near-term needs that we need to solve. And we see our role as how do we get as many solar powered irrigation systems to as many farmers as fast as possible. But in the next 5 years, I think there's scope to be sort of a multiple of 10 larger, and really starting to crack and prove that this works, and hopefully catalyze more. A big reason I want SunCulture to be big and successful, and successful in terms of actually providing huge returns to investors and being able to absorb and allocate huge amounts of money successfully, efficiently.
Sure.
And there's a lot of ways to define success, but in this particular sense, I'm talking about financially successful, is because I want to prove that these types of climate solutions that require both digital and physical infrastructure, which are traditionally looked at being very hard to scale, are super scalable and are really good investments, because we need a lot more of these if we're going to be reaching our climate goals. And if we don't reach our climate goals, the head of the IPCC said that we won't secure a livable future, which is really scary.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be in that position. So a big goal for us is, how do we prove that these businesses are good investments, so that people use us as an example? I want people to say, oh, I can invest in this biogas business, or I can invest in this other hardware-based climate business because of SunCulture. Like I want people to use us as to pattern match is what I really want. So that's sort of the harder and non-tangible version of what SunCulture looks like in 5 years, but that's sort of where we want to go.
Yeah, that's what you're aiming for. I guess that's that's mostly SunCulture. I mean, we don't have a lot of time left, but I would like to hear about, other than SunCulture and solar irrigation for smallholder farmers, what's the most exciting space for you right now in climate change solutions? What are the things you're looking at and admiring? I mean, if you have any off the top of your head.
Oh wow. I'm really, really interested in how people are using carbon revenues to scale technologies in emerging markets that both sort of empower people who are most affected by climate change, but also reduce and avoid carbon emissions. And there's this sort of sweet spot, right? You spoke with Greg from Cocoa. There's a few companies doing this. But there's this sort of, I think there's a big focus on removals right now.
Yep.
And I want to make sure people don't forget that while engineered removals are important in the future, we need to also make sure the future doesn't matter if we don't get to 2030 with 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
And what's most exciting for me, and I think most pressing, is focusing on that. What's going to help us reduce our emissions by what we need to in the next 8 years? So I'm really looking at stuff that is figuring out how to decarbonize big assets. I'm looking at the energy transition into solar. It's just really figuring how to move the $1 trillion of profit that the oil and gas industry makes annually, which don't quote me on that, but I think it's there, and how to use that for energy transition. So I'm really on the energy transition. How do you switch that over? So for me, it's and a big part of it will come from emerging markets. And I think that there's this really big opportunity to solve a lot of problems while you do it. So what's most exciting to me is sort of those areas. I know it was broad, but I guess I'm trying to show where I'm less excited by. And don't get me wrong, engineered solutions are really important, but natural carbon sinks and nature-based solutions are there, and they're working, and they can do a lot of work. So my big focus is on how can we get more people focusing on the next 8 years versus post that, because it's sort of without one, you don't have the other, sadly. We're in this moment in time where you can't just plan for the future. You kind of had to fix it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's refreshing to hear that. Like, I mean, we have so many solutions that that can help right now that we can be deploying, but still so much focus is put on innovation. And it's great to have focus on innovation, of course, but at the same time, as you mentioned, there are lots of nature-based solutions, avoidance projects going on, which are just as critical, if not more.
Yeah. And I was going to say Cocoa networks, but you had them already. So
that's right. Already got to them.
There's another really cool company I think you should talk to called Systema Bio. They're doing
Systema Bio.
Very cool biogas stuff. And again, the additionality and co-benefits are huge. There's a big carbon implication, and they're also really cool. So I think there's some cool innovations, and I think it's how do you there's this people talk about avoidance credits and removal credits. There's this woman that I met a few weeks ago who I think she coined this term called protection credits. So how do you look at sort of if we sell systems to farmers that are lining a very important and very very climate important forest, for example, and we make sure that they have enough money where they're not incentivized to go and cut those trees down. So they're kind of in what's called a buffer zone. So if we figure out how to improve and protect the productivity of those farmers, we're also making sure that we protect these natural carbon sinks. And I think there's this really interesting sort of emerging market theme that can be looked at. And how do you look at sort of very targeted innovations in those areas too? So that's also kind of exciting to me, because it does talk about, it does work with sort of using carbon to replace these technologies, but how do you then like supercharge it? How do you get it to be plus, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about, and SunCulture is definitely one of the ones to watch on that list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's very kind. It's terrific work that you're doing, and it's definitely one that we want to keep an eye on.
Thank you.
I think that's probably just about time. I probably had a few more questions, but we'll have to have you on again.
I'd love
thanks
it.
so much
this
for joining
awesome.
us, Samir. It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for all the work you're doing and for sharing these stories. And yeah, we just have a lot of work to do. So I'm happy to be able to do it with folks like you.
Definitely. Thanks very much. It's great to hear your story.
Thank you.
Thanks.